Victoria Hayes sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the stack of bills that had become her constant companion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on numbers that refused to make sense, no matter how many times she counted them. $300,000? That was what keeping her family alive cost. Her father's stroke rehabilitation, her sister Grace's leukemia treatments, the experimental drugs that insurance refused to cover. All of it balanced precariously on her shoulders, threatening to crush her completely. She was 24 years old, in her final year of nursing school. Working double shifts at a convenience store just to keep their tiny apartment? Her hands shook as she calculated again, knowing the math would never work in her favor. Even if she quit school and worked full-time, even if she never slept, never ate, never breathed without earning money, it would take her a decade to pay off what they owed. Grace didn't have a decade. The doctors had made that painfully clear. An offer wrapped in iced envelope arrived on a Tuesday. It's delivered by a man in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place in their rundown neighborhood. Victoria had been folding laundry in the cramped living room when the knock came. Inside the envelope was a letter printed on heavy cream paper that smelled faintly of cologne. The words were simple, direct, impossible to believe. A private arrangement. Complete confidentiality. Compensation that would solve every problem she had. All she needed to do was meet with someone named Jonathan Pierce. Victoria researched him that night, her laptop glowing in the darkness of her bedroom. Jonathan Pierce, 32 years old, founder and CEO of Pierce Technologies, a company valued at over $2 billion. His face stared back at her from dozens of articles, always the same expression. Cold, controlled, unreachable. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes like winter storms. He looked like someone who had never known struggle, never felt desperation, never understood what it meant to choose between medicine and groceries. The meeting was scheduled for Friday. At his corporate headquarters, Victoria took the subway, her only professional outfit carefully pressed, her resume clutched in sweaty hands, even though she suspected this had nothing to do with a normal job. The building was all glass and steel, reaching into the sky like a monument to wealth. Security checked her identification twice before letting her into an elevator that moved so smoothly she barely felt it rise. The man. Behind the ice, Jonathan Pierce's office occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city that made Victoria feel dizzy. The furniture was modern, expensive, carefully chosen to project power. He stood by the window when she entered, hands in his pockets, not bothering to turn around immediately. When he finally faced her, Victoria understood why people called him ruthless. Everything about him screamed control. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair styled with precision, his expression revealing absolutely nothing. He gestured to a chair without offering his hand. Victoria sat, feeling like she was being evaluated, cataloged, assessed for worth. A folder lay on the desk between them, thick with documents. Jonathan opened it with the casual efficiency of someone handling just another business transaction. He explained the situation in a voice devoid of emotion. He needed an heir for complicated business reasons involving inheritance laws and board pressure. He had no interest in traditional marriage or the complications of romantic relationships. He was looking for someone who needed money desperately enough to agree to his terms. The contract was 50 pages long. Victoria's hands trembled as she turned the pages, each clause more shocking than the last. She would carry his child, live in his home for the duration of the pregnancy, follow all medical protocols exactly. After the birth, she would relinquish all parental rights and disappear from his life completely. In exchange, $500,000. Enough to save Grace, heal her father, and finish her degree. Enough to stop drowning. Crossing the line, Jonathan watched her read, his expression never changing. When she finally looked up, her voice came out smaller than she intended. "This is insane," she whispered. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. "Insane would be pretending people don't make arrangements like this every day. This is simply business." Victoria felt something twist in her chest. Business. As if she was office equipment being leased. As if growing a human being inside. Her body was the same as signing a quarterly report. She asked the questions that burned in her mind. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't get pregnant? What if I change my mind? His answers came quick and precise. Medical care would be the best available. They would try for 1 year, after which the contract could be dissolved, and she wouldn't change her mind because she couldn't afford to. That last part stung because it was true. Victoria closed her eyes, seeing Grace's pale face in her hospital bed. Hearing her father's slurred speech as he tried to form words his damaged brain could no longer find, the pen felt heavy in her hand. Jonathan pushed the signature page toward her, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Victoria searched his face for some hint of humanity, some sign that he understood what he was asking. She found nothing but patience. He would wait. He had all the time in the world. She did not. With a shaking hand, she signed her name. Victoria Hayes. 3 syllables that changed everything. Entering the fortress moving day came faster than she expected. Jonathan sent a car, a sleek black vehicle with a driver who spoke only when necessary. Victoria brought 1 suitcase containing everything she owned. Her sister cried when she said goodbye, not understanding why Victoria was taking this job. Her father squeezed her hand with his good one, gratitude shining in his eyes. She couldn't tell them the truth. How could she explain that she had sold herself? That for the next year her body belonged to someone else? The penthouse was like something from a magazine. White walls, modern furniture, artwork that probably cost more than her entire education. Mrs. Chen, the elderly housekeeper, greeted her with kind eyes and showed her to a guest room that was larger than her old apartment. Everything was beautiful, pristine, empty. Jonathan wasn't home. Mrs. Chen explained he rarely was, often working until past midnight. Sleeping only a few hours before starting again, Victoria unpacked slowly. Hanging her few clothes in a closet designed for hundreds, she found the cameras quickly, small, discreet watching. 1 in the hallway, another in the living room, a third by the front door. She was being monitored, studied, controlled. That night, alone in that enormous bed with sheets that felt like silk. Victoria stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had done. Outside the windows, the city glittered with lights, beautiful and distant. She felt suspended between 2 worlds, belonging to neither. Tomorrow, the medical appointments would begin. Tomorrow, the reality of this arrangement would start. But tonight she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had given up. Her freedom, her dignity, her right to choose what happened to her own body. All traded for money that would keep the people she loved alive. In the darkness, Victoria Hayes whispered a prayer to whatever forces might be listening. Please let this be worth it. Please let me survive this, with some part of myself still intact. But deep down, she already knew. Some prices were too high. Some bargains cost more than money could ever measure. And she had just signed away a piece of her soul. Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then reality crashed back. The silk sheets, the massive bedroom, the contract that had turned her into property. A soft knock at the door made her sit up quickly. Mrs. Chen entered carrying a tray with breakfast, her weathered face creased in a gentle smile. Mr. Pierce left instructions for your schedule, she said quietly, setting the tray on the bedside table. Your first appointment is at 10 o'clock. The food was elegant, carefully portioned. Greek yogurt with fresh berries, whole grain toast, green tea. Everything chosen for optimal nutrition, nothing left to chance. Victoria ate mechanically, tasting nothing. After breakfast, she found her tablet on the dresser with a detailed calendar. Every hour accounted for. 8 in the morning, vitamin supplements. 9:30, light exercise in the building gym. 10 o'clock, consultation with Dr. Patricia Morgan. 12 lunch. 2 in the afternoon rest period. The list continued. Mapping out her entire existence in neat digital boxes, she dressed in the clothes that had been left for her. Simple but expensive items she never would have chosen. Everything fit perfectly, which meant someone had estimated her measurements. The thought made her skin crawl. In the bathroom mirror, she looked the same but felt entirely different. Victoria Hayes, nursing student, had disappeared. In her place stood someone else, a woman playing a role she never auditioned for, behind clinical walls. Patricia Morgan's office was in an exclusive medical building where even the waiting room felt expensive. The doctor was professional, efficient, treating Victoria with the same courtesy she might show anyone. But Victoria saw the truth in her eyes. This was not a normal patient. This was a transaction being facilitated. The examination was thorough, invasive, reducing her to biology and statistics. Everything looked excellent, Dr. Morgan announced, making notes on her computer. We can begin the conception process within the month. Your cycle is regular, your health is good. There should be no complications. Victoria nodded, her throat too tight for words. No complications. As if the complication wasn't the entire situation. As if carrying a stranger's child for money was somehow uncomplicated. The doctor prescribed more vitamins, scheduled follow-up appointments, explained procedures in calm medical language that made everything sound routine. When Victoria finally left, she felt hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides and replaced them with someone else's plan. Back at the penthouse, she tried to read, to watch television, to do anything that felt normal. But nothing was normal. The cameras watched. The schedule dictated. The walls, though beautiful, were still walls. She was living in a golden cage, and the bars were made of money and desperation. That evening, Mrs. Chen prepared dinner, a perfectly balanced meal that Victoria forced herself to eat. She asked about Jonathan, trying to sound casual. Does he always work this late? Mrs. Chen's expression softened with something like sadness. He has worked this way for many years. Since his parents died, I think. He does not know how to stop. Victoria absorbed this information, filing it away. So the Ice King had a tragedy in his past. It didn't excuse his coldness, but it explained something. They were both survivors of different disasters, handling their pain in opposite ways. She, by connecting desperately to everyone she loved. He, by disconnecting from everyone completely. The night. Everything changed. Victoria had been living in the penthouse for 2 weeks, when Jonathan finally came home before midnight. She was in the kitchen, unable to sleep, making tea she didn't really want. She heard the front door open, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, and then he was there. Standing in the kitchen doorway, his tie loosened, his perfect exterior showing cracks of exhaustion. They stared at each other for a long moment. He looked different somehow, more human in the dim kitchen light. You should be sleeping, said his voice lacking its usual hard edge. Victoria wrapped her hands around her teacup. So should you. Jonathan moved to the counter, pouring himself water from the dispenser. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither knew how to say. Victoria watched him drink, noticing details she had missed before. The tension in his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands gripped the glass too tightly. This man was wound so tight he might shatter. Without thinking, she spoke. Do you ever stop? He turned to face her fully. Stop what? Working. Controlling everything. Being alone. Something flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Alone is safer, he said quietly. Victoria set down her tea. Safer than what? Than letting anyone close enough to leave. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way that seemed to surprise them both. Jonathan took a step toward her, then another. Victoria's heart began to race. She should move away, maintain distance. Remember, this was just business. But her feet stayed planted as he approached. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The air felt charged with something dangerous. You should go to bed, he said, but his voice had dropped lower, rougher. Victoria looked up at him, seeing past the ice for the first time to the man beneath. Lonely, damaged. Holding himself together through sheer force of will, breaking the contract, what happened next felt inevitable. Like a wave that had been building since the moment she signed that contract. Jonathan raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers touched her cheek with surprising gentleness. Victoria's breath caught. This wasn't supposed to happen. The contract specified clinical conception, medical procedures, no personal involvement, but nothing about this moment felt clinical. His thumb traced her jawline, his eyes searching hers for something she didn't understand. "We can't," she whispered, even as her body swayed toward his. Jonathan's other hand found her waist, steadying her. "I know," he replied, but he didn't move away. Instead, he leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. Victoria could feel his breath on her lips, warm and unsteady. Every rational thought screamed at her to stop this, to remember what was at stake. But something deeper, something that had nothing to do with contracts or money, pulled her forward. The kiss, when it came, was soft at first. Testing, questioning. Victoria's hands moved to his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. Then something broke between them, all the walls and rules and careful distance crumbling. Jonathan pulled her closer, the kiss deepening, becoming something desperate and real. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers gripped his shoulders, and for those moments, nothing else existed. They broke apart gasping, staring at each other with a mixture of shock and hunger. "This changes everything," Victoria breathed. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his hands didn't leave her body. "Perhaps it already was everything," he said quietly. "Before tonight, before the contract. Perhaps we were both pretending we could keep this cold." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent 2 weeks trying to maintain emotional distance, trying to see this as just a transaction. But standing here in his arms, she knew the truth. Her heart had already betrayed her, the fragile truth. They stood in that kitchen for a long time, neither willing to be the first to let go. Finally, Jonathan stepped back, running a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect style. His expression was conflicted, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "This cannot happen again," he said, but the words lacked conviction. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "Why not?" "Because I will hurt you." His voice was rough with certainty. "I hurt everyone who gets close. I do not know how to be what you need." Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. "Maybe I don't need you to be anything except honest. Maybe that's enough." Jonathan looked at her like she had spoken a foreign language. Like the concept of being accepted as he was had never occurred to him. He opened his mouth to respond, but Mrs. Chen's door opened down the hallway. The spell broke. Jonathan straightened, his mask sliding back into place. "Good night, Victoria," he said formally, already walking away. But at the doorway, he paused. "Tomorrow evening, have dinner with me. Not because the contract says so, because I am asking." Victoria's heart jumped. "Okay," she whispered. After he left, she stood in that kitchen trembling, trying to process what had happened. Everything had changed in the space of a kiss. The careful boundaries they had constructed had shattered. Tomorrow, they would try to navigate this new reality. But tonight, Victoria allowed herself to feel something she had thought impossible. Hope, not for the money or the contract or the practical reasons that had brought her here, but for something far more dangerous. The possibility that behind all that ice, Jonathan Pierce might have a heart that could learn to love. And even more terrifying, the growing certainty that her own heart was already falling. She climbed the stairs to her room slowly, touching her lips where his had been. This was supposed to be simple, clinical, a business arrangement with clear terms and a definite end. But life, she was learning, never respected contracts. Hearts never followed rules. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was let yourself feel. In her room, Victoria looked out at the glittering city, seeing it differently now. Not as a prison, but as possibility. Whatever happened next, whatever complications arose, one thing was certain. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live. And that, more than anything else, terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The following evening arrived with an anxiety that made Victoria change her outfit 3 times. Nothing felt right. Too formal seemed like she was trying too hard. Too casual felt disrespectful. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress that Mrs. Chen had quietly left on her bed, with a knowing smile. The elderly housekeeper had said nothing about the previous night, but her eyes held understanding. She had probably witnessed Jonathan's rare moments of humanity before, probably knew more about his heart than he would ever admit. Jonathan arrived home at 7, earlier than he had in weeks. Victoria heard him moving through the penthouse, the sound of his bedroom door closing, the shower running. When he emerged 30 minutes later, he wore dark jeans and a simple white button-down shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows. She had never seen him look so casual, so approachable. His hair was still damp, falling slightly across his forehead instead of being perfectly styled back. Looked younger somehow, less like the ruthless businessman and more like just a man. Mrs. Chen had prepared dinner and quietly disappeared to her own quarters, leaving them alone. The dining table, usually vast and imposing, had been set intimately at one end, with candles that cast warm, flickering light. Victoria's chair, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle it made her throat tight. They sat across from each other, the candlelight creating shadows and softness between them. For a long moment neither spoke, both seemingly unsure how to navigate this new territory. "Walls coming down, I do not do this," Jonathan said finally, his voice low. "Do what?" Victoria asked, though she thought she knew. "This." He gestured between them, frustrated with his own inability to articulate. "Let people in, have dinners that matter. Feel things I cannot control." Victoria set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "Why did you ask me then?" Jonathan's jaw worked, his internal struggle visible on his face. "Because last night, for the first time in years, I felt something other than empty." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Victoria reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Tell me about them. Your parents?" Jonathan stiffened, his instinct clearly to pull away, to rebuild his walls. But after a moment his hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. "They died in a car accident when I was 23, he said quietly. "I was supposed to be in that car. I stayed late at the office instead. Working on some presentation that seemed so important at the time." Victoria squeezed his hand. "It was not your fault." His eyes met hers, dark with old pain. "Logically, I know that. But logic does not erase guilt. After they died, I buried myself in work, built the company into something massive, proved I could succeed without them. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything except successful. I forgot how to be human." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "You are human, Jonathan. You're just scared." "We both are." They talked through dinner, sharing pieces of themselves they had both kept locked away. Victoria told him about her mother who had died when she was 12, about raising Grace while their father worked 3 jobs, about the moment she realized nursing school was her calling, because she wanted to help people the way no one had been able to help her mother. Jonathan listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. He asked questions, remembered details, responded with empathy she had not known he possessed. The pregnancy test, 2 weeks later, Victoria sat on the bathroom floor holding a plastic stick that would change everything. Dr. Morgan had called that morning, her voice professionally neutral as she delivered the news. The blood test was positive. Victoria was pregnant. The clinical conception process they had begun had worked on the first attempt. She should feel relieved. This was what the contract specified, what she had agreed to. But sitting there, staring at those 2 pink lines, all she felt was terrified, because everything had changed between her and Jonathan. The dinners had continued every evening he was home. They talked about books, childhood memories, dreams they had both given up on. He had started coming home earlier, sometimes in the afternoon, finding excuses to be where she was. They had not kissed again since that night in the kitchen, both afraid of what would happen if they crossed that line completely. But the tension between them was constant, electric. It's impossible to ignore. Victoria heard the penthouse door open, Jonathan's footsteps in the hallway. She stood quickly, splashing water on her face, trying to compose herself. When she emerged from the bathroom, he was in the living room. Jacket already removed, tie loosened. His face lit up when he saw her, that rare, genuine smile that transformed him completely. Then he registered her expression. "What is wrong?" he asked, crossing to her immediately. His hands found her shoulders, steadying her. "I am pregnant," Victoria said simply. There was no good way to deliver the news, no words that would make this less complicated. Jonathan went very still, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at her as if trying to process information his brain could not quite accept. Then slowly, carefully, his hand moved to her stomach, still flat, showing no sign of the life growing inside. His palm was warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Truth in the ruins, Jonathan's eyes met hers. And what she saw there took her breath away. Not the cold calculation she expected. Not the clinical satisfaction of a contract being fulfilled. Instead, she saw wonder mixed with fear, joy tangled with terror. "A baby," he whispered, his voice breaking on the words. "Our baby." The way he said it, not my heir or the child, but our baby, shattered something inside Victoria. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that spoke louder than words. Victoria buried her face in his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her cheek. This was not supposed to happen. She was not supposed to fall in love with him. He was not supposed to care about her beyond the terms of their agreement. But hearts never followed contracts, and somewhere between obligation and proximity, they had both broken every rule they set. "We need to talk about the contract," Jonathan said finally, his voice muffled against her hair. Victoria pulled back to look at him. "What about it?" He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I do not want you to leave after the baby is born. I do not want you to disappear from my life. I want—" He stopped, struggling with words that clearly did not come easily. "I want you to stay, both of you, as a family." Victoria's heart hammered so hard, she thought it might break through her ribs. "What are you saying?" Jonathan's expression was raw, vulnerable, more open than she had ever seen him. "I am saying that somewhere between that first signature and this moment, you became everything I did not know I needed. I am saying that I am terrified of being a father, terrified of failing you both, but more terrified of living without you. I am saying." He took a shaking breath. "I love you, Victoria. I did not think I could anymore. But you made me feel again." The crisis that defined everything before Victoria could respond, her phone rang. The sound shattered the moment, harsh and insistent. She saw Grace's name on the screen and answered with shaking hands. Her sister's voice was panicked, broken by sobs. "Dad collapsed. We are at the hospital. They said something about his brain, bleeding, surgery. Victoria, I am scared." The world tilted. Victoria grabbed the counter to steady herself, her vision blurring. "I am coming," she managed to say. "Which hospital?" Jonathan was already moving, grabbing his keys, his jacket. "I will drive," he said firmly. The ride to the hospital was a blur of city lights and crushing fear. Jonathan drove with focused intensity, one hand on the wheel, the other holding hers tightly. He spoke quietly, calmly, anchoring her when panic threatened to pull her under. "He is strong. He has survived this much. He will survive this too." At the hospital, Grace sat in the waiting room, small and terrified. She threw herself into Victoria's arms, sobbing. "They made me leave the room. They would not let me stay with him." Jonathan spoke to the nurses, to the doctors, using his name and influence to get information when Victoria's voice would not work. Her father had suffered a massive brain hemorrhage, a complication from his previous stroke. He was in surgery now. The next few hours would determine everything. Victoria sank into a plastic chair, Grace's head on her shoulder, trying to hold herself together. This was why she had signed that contract. To prevent exactly this kind of crisis, to ensure her family had the best care. But now, sitting in this fluorescent-lit waiting room, she realized how much more complicated everything had become. Jonathan sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, solid and unwavering. Grace looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Are you Victoria's boss?" she asked innocently. Jonathan glanced at Victoria, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. "He is more than that," Victoria said softly. Grace, this is Jonathan. She paused, searching for words that would not require explanations her sister was too young to understand. He is someone very important to me. Love without conditions. The surgery took 6 hours. Jonathan stayed the entire time, leaving only to bring food no one ate and coffee that grew cold in their hands. He made phone calls, arranged for the best neurosurgeon in the city to assist, assured Victoria's father would receive care that most people could never access. He did it all quietly, without fanfare, asking nothing in return. When the surgeon finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, Victoria could barely breathe. He made it through. The next 48 hours are critical, but he is stable. Victoria collapsed into Jonathan's arms, sobbing with relief. He held her tightly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Grace hugged them both, creating a circle of connection that felt startlingly like family. Later, after they had seen her father, after Grace had fallen asleep in a chair by his bedside, Victoria and Jonathan stood in the hospital hallway. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the smell of antiseptic sharp. Nothing about this moment was romantic or beautiful. But it was real. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, "for everything you did tonight." Jonathan shook his head. "You do not need to thank me. This is what people do when they love someone. They show up. They stay. They fight." Victoria looked up at him. This man who had seemed so cold and unreachable. Somewhere beneath all that ice had always been a heart capable of profound love. He had just needed someone to believe in him long enough for him to remember how. "I love you too," she said, the words finally escaping. I fought it, told myself it was just proximity or gratitude or hormones. But standing here tonight, watching you care for my family like they are yours, I know the truth. I love you, Jonathan Pierce. Not because of the contract or the money or the baby. I love you because you let me see past your walls. Because you are brave enough to feel again. Even though it terrifies you, New Beginnings Jonathan kissed her there in that hospital hallway, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "The contract is void," he said firmly. "I will still pay what I promised because your family needs it, but not as payment for a child. As a gift, because I love you, and I want your family safe and cared for. You are not obligated to stay with me, Victoria, but I'm asking you to choose too. Not because you need money, but because you want to build a life together." Victoria felt tears stream down her face. But for the first time in months, they were tears of joy. "I choose you," she whispered. "I choose us. I choose this messy, complicated, beautiful thing we are building together." Jonathan smiled, really smiled, and Victoria saw the man he had been before tragedy taught him to protect himself with ice. That man was still there, still capable of warmth and love and hope. He had just been waiting for someone to remind him. They spent the night at the hospital, taking turns sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, watching over Victoria's father and Grace. When morning came, streaming through the windows with golden light, Victoria stood at her father's bedside holding Jonathan's hand. Her father's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding her face, he smiled weakly. The surgery had stolen some of his words, but his eyes said everything. He was grateful. He would fight. He would survive. Grace woke and stretched, looking between Victoria and Jonathan with the intuitive wisdom of the very young. "Are you two together now?" she asked bluntly. Victoria laughed, the sound strange and wonderful after so much fear. "Yes," she said simply. "We are together." Grace grinned. "Good, he seems nice. And rich, that helps." Even Jonathan laughed at that, the sound rusty but genuine. Victoria leaned into him, feeling his arm wrap around her waist, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach where their child grew. Forever starts no 6 months later. Victoria stood in the nursery Jonathan had insisted on designing himself. Soft yellow walls, a hand-carved wooden crib, shelves filled with books waiting to be read. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm. Jonathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, his hands covering hers. "Have I told you today that I love you?" he murmured against her ear. Only 3 times, she replied, smiling. Unacceptable. I love you. Victoria Pierce. She had taken his name in a small ceremony 2 months earlier, with Grace as her bridesmaid and her father in a wheelchair, but smiling broadly. No contract, no obligations, just 2 people choosing each other freely. Mrs. Chen had cried through the entire ceremony. Grace was in remission, responding well to the treatments that Jonathan's money had made possible. Victoria's father was relearning to speak, making progress every day. The nursing degree she had thought she would have to abandon was nearly complete, Jonathan having insisted she finish while he rearranged his schedule to be home more. I love you too, Victoria said, turning in his arms. Thank you for saving me. Jonathan shook his head, his eyes soft with emotion he no longer tried to hide. You saved me first. I was dead inside, just going through motions. You taught me how to live again, how to feel, how to love. They stood together in that nursery, surrounded by proof that sometimes the most broken paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. What started as a desperate deal had become something neither had imagined possible. Not just obligation fulfilled, but destiny discovered. Not just a contract, but a love story written in the space between heartbeats. And as the sun set over the city, they both called home. Victoria and Jonathan held each other, their child moving between them, and knew with absolute certainty that some things were worth more than any contract could capture. Love, family, hope, these were the things that mattered. These were the things that lasted. These were the things that made them whole.